How you doing? So the Dark Side of the Ring took place, the Owen Hart episode, which was, expected to be one of the more depressing episodes of Dark Side of the Ring. And it kind of was. It was pretty hard to watch. It was difficult to watch. Um, so in this video, we're not just going to go through the Dark Side of the Ring. We're also going to go through an article by David Bixenspan, which I really don't like David Bixenspan, but you got to give the devil his due on this. He did a really good job of discussing some of the key points of the Owen Hart case. We're also going to go through the police investigations and some of the lawsuit information. So this is going to be a really long video. So if you liked Dark Side of the Ring, you should like this video because it's going to give you a lot more context of what actually took place. Because the Dark Side of the Ring, let's talk about this first. They skipped over a lot of the legal stuff, a lot of the details, and a lot of the legal stuff, and focused on far more on the emotional aspects of it. Like we start the story with Owen's family videos, home videos, which the Hearts are really good for. The Hearts they have a big family, so they have a constant stream of videos and home movies and different things like that. And another interesting thing here is there are no Hearts in this entire program other than Martha, Athena, and Oj. Those are the only Hearts involved with this entire production. Now, the reason for that comes up a little bit later. So we get footage of Owen getting involved in wrestling, doing wrestling in Calgary. He's doing a lot of high flying stuff, just showing off Owen's athletics and how talented he was as a professional wrestler. Martha talked about how she met Owen at 15. They fell in love, they got married. Owen wanted a normal life. Yet, he kind of was always looking for life after wrestling. Jim Cornette says that, Owen wasn't a lifer in the wrestling business like a lot of other, versions, other Hearts were, like, Brett and, Davey Boy Smith and a lot of those guys. They weren't lifers, and this is something that comes up later as, the family just kind of wanted, Owen. So they go through Owen's career, him coming out of Brett's shadow. They bring up the Blue Blazer, which of course is his earlier gimmick, and how he transitioned. They skipped the whole idea of Owen being in the tag team and all that type of stuff. The high energy, that stuff's just kind of not important anyway. But they skipped all that. They went through the Owen Brett rivalry. They kind of went through some of that, and it kind of slowed down right around the Montreal screw job. So, Brett is heartbroken about the Montreal screw job, and Owen is kind of like, whatever, it's all bullshit. This is, Martha's saying that, Owen was kind of like, was telling Brett, like, this is all bullshit. Don't worry about it. Not a big deal. But Brett is a lot more passionate about wrestling than Owen is. So, we get into the really interesting part for me is that it does, and maybe we didn't notice it at the time, but Owen Hart is a pure athlete, a pure wrestler. He's really good at wrestling. That's what the Harts are trained to do. But now here comes the Attitude Era. And the Attitude Era is filled with crazy gimmicks. So you got porn stars and undead warriors and pyromaniacs, and you got crotch chopping and over the top personalities, and then you got Owen. So, like, what do you do with Owen Hart in the Attitude Era? And they kind of went through the idea of, they were doing the whole, he was having an affair with Deborah, which I completely forgot. I completely forgot about that. I didn't watch a lot of the Attitude Era stuff back, if we're being honest, because I don't really like it, so I didn't go back, and I didn't remember that they even did a storyline between Owen and Deborah. I forgot all about that. But Martha would say Owen would push back on these things, that they would put him in these stupid costumes, or they would tell him to do stupid storylines, and he wouldn't want to do it, so he would get out of it, and different things like that. But this was actually after the Montreal Screwjob, Owen Hart gets a new contract, so he gets a new contract to prevent him from leaving, because Jim Ross is like, hey, we know what we got here. We got the young Hart. The older Hart is gone. We got the younger one, who is an incredibly talented guy. And Chris Jericho says later in the documentary that if Owen would have made it through 99, in 2000, you would have had Eddie Guerrero, Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko, all these guys who were pure wrestlers for Owen to work with. So that era of Owen being stuck in this bullshit would not have lasted that much longer, which is another thing that kind of blew my mind from this documentary, because I didn't think about that. That you did have, Owen Hart being the uber technical guy in a situation where he's surrounded by, again, porn stars and undead super warriors, and he's kind of lost in the shuffle. So because he's lost in the shuffle, in 1998 they resurrect the Blue Blazer, and the Blue Blazer is going to come down from the rafters in the full get up, with the rigging and all that type of stuff. And this was, I guess, an attempt to make Owen quote unquote interesting. No names are used in this situation, but it is one of the most agreed upon pieces of business in this whole ordeal. Is Jim Ross is like, this is an utter creative failure, and it is. The idea that we don't know what to do with Owen Hart, so we're just going to make him a superhero who, well, I guess it kind of goes into the delusional Owen Hart character, because Owen Hart's character has always been very delusional, and that maybe he would turn himself into a superhero to sort of think that he, was saving people. I guess it could have made sense down the line, but of course we didn't get that far. So they showed clips of Owen hanging from the rafters at a Survivor Series 1998, where they showed the rigging, because that's when they started introducing the rigs and the rigging and all that type of stuff. And the rigging is so technical, right? And it's something that most people don't understand. Okay, so but they go through that Owen hated heights and all this type of stuff, and then of course Owen gets to the top of the catwalk and he's hooked up to his rig. We're going to get into what exactly happened in the later part of this video when we go through the police investigation, because Bobby Talbert's going to get into what actually happened with Owen Hart. But he wasn't in the documentary. Nobody who was sued in the lawsuit was in the documentary. There were no riggers in the documentary because they went through no detail of what happened with Owen Hart. So, but they did have a lot of people who were in the building when Owen Hart fell. So Jimmy Corderas, who was in the ring, who's the referee, I guess, for the match, was in the ring. He said that he brushed something. He felt something brush across his head, and when he looked down, the rope moved, and he looked down, and it was Owen. That was fucking traumatic. JR says he gets elbowed by Jerry the King Lawler, and Jerry the King Lawler sees Owen up in the air, and he sees Owen falling, and JR says he just sees a blue blur come past his face. And I was just like, oh, that was horrifying. And the Godfather, who was going to be Owen's opponent for the night, he's at Gorilla, right outside the curtain. He didn't see it happen, but he's waiting for, his theme music to play so he can go out and face Owen. But then they say Owen, he's told that Owen fell. And then, JR is trying to fill time. He's trying to fill time because Owen has fallen in the middle of a live pay-per-view event. And, he says that he wasn't told anything and that he saw Owen fall, but he wasn't given any updates. And then he says that he hears in his ear Kevin Dunn says, like, you gotta give the fans an update. And then JR is like, we don't know what's happening. We don't know what's going on. And then he says that Kevin Dunn told him that he's dead and now you're on in 10, 9, kind of gives him the countdown to start talking. And then JR has to deliver his famous words about Owen Hart being dead. And that sounded especially callous. It sounded especially callous and fucked up. And Jim Cornette, who I guess was not in the building, I don't think he was with the WWF at the time, he says that he was told by a lot of people that Owen's last words were "look out." He was yelling "look out" as he fell to the ground. So Martha is at home with the kids. None of them are watching the show, apparently, because none of them mentioned watching the show. Martha was, she said she got a phone call, and she thought it was Owen calling, doing a prank call. And she thought he was doing a Vince McMahon impression. But, it was really Vince McMahon. And he called her to tell her that Owen had failed. But he didn't know that Owen was dead yet. And he said that, doctors or somebody like that will call you. And then when she got the call from the doctors, that's when she was told that he died. Oj told the story of where he was. He was, I think he said he was with his neighbors, or he was in the basement or something like that. He was a little kid. He was only like 7 at the time. And he said that they were basically told that their dad was dead right before bedtime. And they all slept in the same bed together. And, nobody got any sleep. And, everybody was crying and things like that. Okay, so after Owen died, they started going into the investigation. Martha says she wants justice, quote unquote, whatever that means, right? So the body, Owen's body is shipped from Calgary. They go through how horrifying that was for her to see Owen's dead body when it was shipped from Kansas City to Calgary, so he could be buried. That's fucked up, But what else did you do with a dead body? So they go through the investigation, and this part is probably going to be one of the only times you're going to hear me openly criticize Martha. She goes to Kansas City, and she takes the kids up on the top of Kempler Arena to look over the catwalk where Owen fell, and they did a really good job of having police footage of what the catwalk looked like, what the fall looks like. It's 80 feet, so it's straight down, and that had to be some traumatic shit to take kids through. I'm sorry, like I don't even understand how you had that conversation where you look over the banister where their father fell to his death, and what did you say? Like, this is where your daddy died? Like what the hell? How could you? That had to be some especially traumatic shit. Okay, it's bad enough the dad was dead, so now you go to this spot, and they have to relive it. They have to go and look over, and it's like, come on, man. Like we didn't need that. But so they go into the rigging of that the rigging was negligent and all this type of. They didn't go into any detail. She just said that, okay, this is one little clip was supposed to hold on. And they showed the clip because I guess Martha has the clip in her possession. She has the court documents and all that type of stuff, and apparently in a box somewhere. So she has the actual clip that was supposed to hold Owen Hart up in their garage or something, which is again bizarre. So they have the clip, and she showed it, like this one little clip, and she showed how it opens and everything. So then she goes into the debate that she said Bixenspan sued her for breaking Owen's contract. This is something she talked about on Talk Is Jericho. I didn't listen to that either. I really don't like this Owen Hart situation because there's a lot of mudslinging and ugliness that comes with it. But she talked about that, the debate over whether the lawsuit should be in Missouri or Connecticut, whatever. And then she says that, that if the family was separated on this subject because there were people within the Hart family that didn't support the lawsuit, and then there were people who did, and then there were people who are actively working against her. Uh, Thus, there are no Harts in this documentary, right? So there are no other Harts except for Athena, who is in it twice, Oj, who did some talking, and Martha, who did the bulk of the talking. So Martha said she didn't want a lawsuit; she wanted justice. Don't know what that means, and because the lawyers are not going to accept the lawsuit unless you want to accept the lawsuit. So for her to say that she didn't want to accept the lawsuit but she accepted the lawsuit doesn't make any sense. But again, it's a narrative choice. Another narrative choice is to make when she said that it was that Bixenspan discarded Owen's dead body, scooped his dead body out of the ring. I wish I had wrote down exactly what she said, but it was incredibly vivid and brutal, and that the police should have stopped the show, and it was a potential crime scene, and the end result is that they want Owen's legacy to be the Hart Foundation, which is some type of Owen Hart legacy community organization that they created, and the kids are fully on board with this. So if you had any reservations about Owen Hart being in the Hall of Fame, no, because not only is it Martha, it's also the kids. So Owen's legacy is essentially taken out of the WWF. You could just forget it. But that was the bulk of the Dark Side of the Ring. It was decent. It was pretty good, as far as they really did a good job with the home videos, and they showed the police footage, with the police took some pictures of the crime scene, or the fall, the catwalk in the arena, the top of the arena, all that type of stuff. The police did a decent job. So let's get into this article by David Bixenspan, which is going to tell us basically what happened. It's going to fill in a lot of the holes of what happened. Then after that, we're going to get into the police investigation, which is going to basically we're going to talk about what Bobby Talbert, what he went through, because he has not really been allowed to defend himself at all in this situation. But we're going to go through the police investigation, basically who they talked to and different. We're not going to go through the whole police investigation situation. That thing was 73 pages. Okay, I'm going to focus on Bobby Talbert and Tom Dwyer. Tom Dwyer was not there, but he was the guy the police brought in as a expert, sort of, to teach them what could have happened and whether this was negligence to the extent of homicide or just basic accident. So we're going to go through that. We're going to go through the article first. We're going to go through the police investigation, which basically is going to be Bobby Talbert talking about exactly what happened. We're going to go through Tom Dwyer, and then we're going to go through one of the lawsuits, which is not mentioned because they did not mention that WWE actually sued the company that manufactured the snap shackle, due to them having knowledge that the sort of snap shackle that was sold to Bobby Talbert not being something that should be used on human beings. Apparently, of course, WWE couldn't have known that. Bobby Talbert, of course, well, they say he didn't know. Who knows whether he knew or not? But at the end of the story is that company was also sort of negligent, and there was also a lot of other things that went along with that. But we'll get into that part of the documentary, or that not that part of the documentary, that's part of this video, because the documentary part is over. And then at the end, we'll get into my personal thoughts of that night, May 23rd, 1999, and my thoughts on Owen Hart to close the show. So let's see you guys. Let's talk to you about this David Bixenspan article. We could literally be here all night on the Owen Hart thing, but let's just go to, I think, a source that put together a lot of the information quite well, and surprisingly is David Bixenspan. You gotta give the devil his credit. He did a article on Owen Hart called "After 2 Decades, Owen Hart's Death is Still WWE's Darkest Hour." It dropped May 23rd, 2019, which was, of course, last year. Almost 1 year ago, exactly. And he actually goes through some of the affidavits and things like that, the books, stuff I do not have time to go through. But I have double checked a lot of his conclusions. So I did go through some of the documents, not all of them, but I did read the police file and a lot of the other documents that are actually included that are linked in here. So I'm going to try to fill in where I can. Instead of reading those documents out, I may read some of them out. But I'm not going to read all of it because, we simply, this video would be 8 hours if we had to do stuff like that. I mean, this is it's a labyrinth of a case. So let's start the Bixenspan article. If you were a wrestling fan on May 23rd, 1999, you were probably doing one of three things. One of those was watching WWE's latest pay-per-view event, Over the Edge. Another was using Scramble Vision to listen to the event by tuning a TV or VCR without a cable box to the video pay-per-view channel. Some fans were probably also watching the Jesse Ventura story on NBC, which they doubtless regretted instantly. The low-budget Ventura biopic made with cooperation for WWE's rival promotion WCW was an absolute catastrophe of a film, as a rushed, obvious cash-in of Ventura's upset win in the Minnesota gubernatorial election 6 months earlier. While bad and stupid in every possible way, the movie's most enduring artistic legacy is the absurd amount of creative license it took, most famously through making Ventura a central figure of a scenario that was clearly based on Bret Hart's last night in WWE. As the movie aired on the East Coast and the pay-per-view was beamed from Kansas City, Bret Hart was flying to Los Angeles for what should have been a highlight of his career. He was slated to wrestle on The Tonight Show with Jay Leno, but that never happened. The cockpit door opened and the pilot came out, and I just knew he was looking for me, Hart wrote in his memoir. He handed me a note that read, "Bret Hart, please call home, family emergency." Heeding the advice, got Hart noting nothing but busy signals, so he checked his voicemail, where he heard a frantic message from Carl DeMarco, a Hart fan who later became his business manager, who had since moved on to running WWE's Canadian operations. Bret's baby brother Owen was the lone family member left in WWE. DeMarco making such a call had obvious connotations. Brett tried every phone in first class to no avail until he found the only one that worked. DeMarco answered right away and issued repeated "Are you sitting down?" warnings. Brett demanded that he just spit it out. Owen's dead. He got killed doing some kind of stunt in the ring. All that anyone would learn that night was that Owen was set to rappel from the top of the arena in his Blue Blazer character to parody his WCW rival Sting. Somehow, Hart's harness was disconnected and he fell to his death. On the broadcast, viewers saw none of that. Owen fell while a video hyping his match was playing both in the arena and on TV. Though the Spanish language announcers' microphones at ringside were open so they could translate, their horrified reactions to the actual fall were heard in real time. Viewers got only the most basic information. Cameras showed the live fans who themselves were never actually given any information. Once Hart was wheeled to the back and a waiting ambulance, the show picked up with the next scheduled match almost as if nothing had happened. The ring was visibly broken in the corner where Owen had landed, and the wrestlers avoided that section. The busted ring gave WWE plenty of cover to end the show, but they didn't. Instead, Jeff Jarrett, Owen's best friend in the company, was shoved out to do. Shoved out is a narrative choice. Shoved out to do an interview alongside his valet Deborah. They then staged their scheduled match despite barely seeming on the verge of tears in their promo. An hour later, after Hart's family was notified, the pay-per-view audience was told of Owen Hart's death. The rest of the show was a bizarre approximation of normal, staged by people who had been fundamentally broken. Another narrative choice. They were short a referee as Jimmy Cordeiro, set to work the Blue Blazers match with the Godfather, was in the ring when Hart fell. Owen made light contact with him, albeit enough to cause a bump on his head, before crashing to the ring, and Cordeiro was fine. He required a precautionary hospital visit. The show just went on without them, regardless of just how obvious it was that it shouldn't have. There's just a lot of this. The show should just have been canceled. Stuff that goes on. I'm not going to give an expert opinion on whether the show should be canceled after an accident, but I think you do have to realize that that there's a paying audience, and you're going to obviously not just disappoint them, but you're going to have to probably offer refunds if something happens, and that's a lot more money lost, and you can say that, well, you shouldn't care about the money, but it's a business, it's not a charity. If people are paid to see Stone Cold Steve Austin, and I think Mick Foley was in the main event of that show, and people were paying to see that, okay, at least give them that, and I get that a lot of people just want to be, it's all post hoc reasoning anyway. It's all like, well, thinking about it in retrospect, this is what we should have did. But the show goes on. It's a Hollywood thing, and it's for good reasons, because people are paying to see the show. And if you end the show abruptly, they're going to feel, like, hey, you cheated us out of money, we're going to want our refunds. And then you're also talking about all the people who bought the pay-per-view. So you're talking about maybe who knows how many hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars that have to be refunded into this situation. So you can't just say, well, but it's easy to say that when it's not your money, right? When it's not your money, it's easy to say, well, we should have just done this, we should have just done that. But let's continue. Right before the main event, one camera caught the usually unflappable Undertaker on the verge of tears and staring sullenly at the broken corner of the ring. This is a stunt that's performed on a routine basis at a number of venues. WWE boss Vince McMahon explained at an impromptu press conference later that night, footage of which was excerpted in the Life and Death of Owen Hart documentary. Owen was simply to descend from the ring into the ring in a superhero-like fashion, McMahon said, when a reporter asked why there was no backup line of any kind, as that would be the normal, expected way to do a stunt. McMahon replied, "I'm not an expert in rigging. I guess you are." The reporter pressed on, saying that it still looked like there were no, quote-unquote, no precautionary measures, which raised the ire of McMahon, who continued deflecting. "First of all, I resent your tone," he answered back. The reporter shot back, "I resent the sarcasm." No, I resent your tone, lady, okay?" McMahon continued, This is a tragic accident. Don't try to put yourself in the spotlight here, okay? This was an accident. Do you understand what I'm saying? An accident. You didn't have to put this much in here. And everything that should have taken place in terms of rigging, to our knowledge at this moment, that did take place. It was rehearsed in the afternoon and everything was fine. That's all I know. Okay. Even to wrestling fans without any time to do research, it seemed weird. How could this have happened? Sting's regular descents to the ring in WCW were so laborious that the heels he faced often were stuck lingering uncomfortably while Sting unhooked himself after landing. How could WWE have been so reckless with the life of one of its stars in that what was effectively a parody of that? Uh, I don't know if the Blue Blazer was supposed to be a parody of Sting, considering the Blue Blazer existed as a character before Sting. I mean, well, not actually. I don't know if it existed before Sting, but the Blue Blazer was Owen Hart's original character. So to say that he was supposed to be a parody of Sting, of course, is again a narrative choice, which means he's telling a story. This is not necessarily true. The Blue Blazer was a character that Owen Hart played before Sting repelled from the ring. Now, Owen Hart was not repelling from the ring at the time. They kind of added that element to the Blue Blazer character, but the Blue Blazer was Owen Hart's original character before he started doing, was it High Energy with Coco Beware? Before he started doing that, he was the Blue Blazer. So to think that the Blue Blazer was a parody of Sting, I don't know where that comes from. Maybe I'm recording this before the documentary happened, so maybe the documentary will explain why he thinks that it's a parody of Sting, but it's not really. It's Owen Hart's original character, and why they were going back to it again. A lot of it is so much mudslinging about people like Vince Russo or Vince McMahon or Jim Cornette or what any of these people might have said in a dark room somewhere, and stuff that was never recorded and is not in any documents or anything like that. So it's very difficult to get into it. But I don't understand why he would think that the Blue Blazer, which was Owen Hart's original character, was a parody of Sting. Okay, so but it's kind of weird that he would combine these two sentences talking about Sting's descents and how could it WWE have been so reckless. I think that we're kind of gonna get to he's gonna answer this rhetorical question. But let's get back to the article. A wrongful death lawsuit against the promotion was inevitable, and when it did come a few weeks later, an already terrible situation quickly got even dirtier and uglier. Martha, Owen's widow, found herself publicly sparred with WWE over such matters as the cost of her husband's funeral and a clip of wrestlers' mourning airing on Monday Night Raw. Those quickly took the backseat to the lawsuit, which is where fans learn most of what there is to understand about this incomprehensible accident. The public version of the civil case file contains a lot of information that isn't commonly known. Due to her access to the documents that were not available to the public, Martha's book, Broken Hearts, is the definitive source of information regarding the fact-finding in the case. The book was never a huge seller, and so what it revealed about what really happened in Kansas City are not nearly as well known as they should be. Additional information in the court records round out the picture. It is not prettier than you'd expect. I think that you really kind of have to say that saying that a book is the definitive source, not really. Okay, the reason why that is because the book is written in a certain way. You really, when you talking, and this comes up again later in the article. When you're embroiled in a lawsuit with somebody or have been embroiled in a lawsuit with somebody, you have no, and especially when I'm not going to use certain words to describe Martha, but let's just say she has a certain feeling about the WWF. She's not going to be charitable in her defense, in her attack of the WWF because of how she feels and because of the situation. So to say that a definitive source is so obviously biased does not make sense. Okay, so. But I would imagine that she would say, hey, this is what was in certain documents. This is what we was able to bring to the table. She does have that kind of information. But there are going to be things that are going to be left out of such a biased piece of material. But the accident, a lawsuit centered around the equipment that failed in the stunt, a quick release The quick release snap shackle manufactured by Lumar, a British company specializing in marine equipment. If the danger inherent to using that sort of device for a stunt that involves rappelling 78 feet seem obvious to you, it should. The industry standard was a more secure type of locking system used in mountain climbing. According to Broken Hearts, WWE had been using eminently qualified theatrical rigger Joe Branham for 3 years. Whenever the occasion called for such a stunt, Branham had decades of experience working with the biggest possible names, and that could require his services from Disney to musicians like NSYNC. Hart's book notes that Branham was struck by how, at least 3 different times, WWE's then VP of Event Operations Steve Taylor communicated to him that Vincent Mann personally wanted Branham to use some kind of quick release for the stunts. Each time, Branham repeated that those weren't safe for human use in this case. How could some small amount of time saved in getting out of the harness be worth such a risk? This is another one of those he said, she said things, right? Like, this is not in any of the documents that I read. But whatever. Branham's assistant, Randy Beckham, was used for Owen's previous fly-in 6 months earlier in St. Louis, which used a more secure locking carabiner system. Which, while it went fine, Beckham was shocked that Owen did not know that he'd be doing the stunt at all. Beckham had to tell the wrestler himself, even with a slew of redundancy and safety equipment. Beckham recalled Owen's anxiety at having to do the stunt. "Don't drop me," he told Beckham. "I'm scared." The rigger made sure to tell Steve Taylor about that. Now they're talking about previous stories, right? So WWE sought out Branham's company for a similar stunt on Raw in Orlando just 13 days before Over the Edge. He quoted the same price that he had in previous instances, which was $5,000. Taylor replied that it wasn't in the budget. The rigger soon grew concerned about the stunt. Orlando, he reasoned, was filled with less skilled labor from the area's theme parks, and he worried that they would be willing to do the job more cheaply and less safely, perhaps even using the quick release snap shackles that McMahon kept asking about. So Branham asked Beckham to call Taylor, offering to drop the price by 40% to $3,000. Taylor told them that the stunt was canceled. Canceled in this case may have just meant postponed. But Branham's fears were proved well-founded. The rigger at Over the Edge, Bobby Talbot, was an Orlando resident who generally did the rigging for theme park shows. Now, Bobby Talbot is a soccer ball in this entire situation, okay? He has just been kicked around by essentially everybody, and this is the nature of being responsible for your actions. So, like, when you're put in control of something and you're the guy at the top, whenever something goes on, all of a sudden you become the most unprofessional, unskilled piece of shit that ever existed. And they pretty much kicked Bobby Talbot from the rooter to the tutor, as they used to say when I was a kid. So everybody kind of seems, but we'll get into it a little bit more. But Bobby Talbot he got a lot of footprints after this whole ordeal, and we'll see. We may see why later, because we'll see how much of this stuff I actually use. "I had never heard of rigger Bobby Talbot prior to reviewing this case," wrote Brian Smyj. I have no idea how to pronounce that name. Smidge, a stunt coordinator specializing in rappelling, and a sworn affidavit for the plaintiffs, which will be Martha Hart. "In reviewing this case, I have learned that he had been employed at the time with the Universal Studios stunt show in Orlando. In the stunt industry, people employed at the Universal Stunt Show are known to be quote-unquote bottom of the barrel. People in the industry, they take about $30 per show." Gary Roy, and Manny Chavez, 2 other experts, provided similar affidavits. I did read these affidavits, and they are scathing as far as, basically, this is where a lot of the footprints for on Bobby Talbot come from. But then again, these are experts for the plaintiffs, right? We don't know if there are any experts for the defendants. So when you have a situation that occurs where you're talking about equipment failure or something incredibly technical like rigging, you're going to have people on both sides. You're going to have expert witnesses throwing information back and forth, and that's kind of why I don't really want to get into the grainy detail of what the system was that was supposed to be used. But I think that it's really kind of unfair to just let people, kick the shit out of them, especially when they have motivation to do so, because this was an incident that where somebody died. It's really easy to just shit on somebody for that, right? It's really easy to do that. While some then WWE personnel have claimed that Talbot had also handled Sting's descents, that was not the case, according to a deposition from WCW stunt coordinator Ellis Edwards, which was taken as part of a complaint against Lumar, Talbert was brought in by WCW's usual rigger Barry Brazil on the 3 occasions in 1998, at which point Sting had been doing the stunt for some time. Even then, Talbert was used mainly for occasions in which Sting had to be raised back to the rafters. Bobby Talbert also said that he worked in WCW in the police report. I'm not sure if I'm going to put the police report before this or after, but I'm going to read the Bobby Talbert parts of the police report. That's necessary for this to even discuss this subject, is to at least get some defense of the guy who, everybody is just talking down to, But he claims that he worked with Sting for 2 or 3 years, and basically we don't get into the detail. He never gets into the detail of what he actually did, but people saying that he didn't work there or he had a limited concept will come out after the police investigation, obviously. So it says, okay, even then, Talbot was used mainly for occasions when Sting had to be raised back to the rafters. Per Broken Hearts, Talbot told the police that Steve Taylor had told him that WWE was looking for a new rigger because its previous hires, Branham and Beckman, had set up Owen in a way that was quote-unquote too slow for the camera. This was similarly told in the police investigation that there were camera angles and things like that had to be that had to be taken into account, and they wanted it to look like Sting, which Sting used to descend from the ring and go up to the ring very quickly. Now this might be a different concept than being unhooked quickly. Okay, so when people start talking about speed, you might be talking about speed of descent, or and speed of ascent, or they might be talking about speed of basically being unhooked from the device. Now, it's a completely different scenario because Owen Hart was doing this for his entrance. So that means, Sting was usually doing it for action shots. He would descend and then, surprise the villains. And then, they would have to be surprised for, a long time as he unhooks himself, right? That's a lot different than Owen, who would be descending from the ring with nobody attacking him and him not being in position to attack anyone else. So honestly, Owen did not have to be brought down to the ring as fast as Sting did, right? So when he says it's too slow for the cameras, you have to, or different camera angles or whatever, you need to take into account the different purposes of what Sting and Owen Hart was going to be doing. How did the quick release that cost Owen his life deploy? The best guess per Broken Hearts had to do with how Talbot dealt with a cord that Owen was supposed to pull on just above the ring. Albert drew that cord across his subject's shoulder and taped it to the front of his vest with gaffer tape, allowing a small amount of slack. That slack was such that other movements of the vest, from deep breaths to Owens adjusting his cape, could accidentally trigger the shackle, which required just 6 pounds of pressure. In testing for the lawsuit, a man wearing an outfit similar to Owens' blue blazer gear caused the trigger to release just by adjusting his cape. Okay, this is essentially this. You could get this sort of understanding just from reading the police investigation, where there was a Tom Dwyer, who was a stuntman who the police brought in to do to review the case. He pretty much came to the same conclusion that the vests and the harness were not properly were not the appropriate equipment to use. I'm going to read his documents as well, because I think that they're very important, and I think he was a lot more charitable to Talbot and a lot more understanding than a lot of the people that Martha brought in. And I think that he brought in a fairer critique of Bobby Talbot's work. But yeah, that's essentially what happened. Is Owen was above the arena. He was uncomfortable in his rig. He adjusted something, it unhooked, and he fell. Lab analysis also found some kind of grease on the shackle, although when it was applied, it is noted not noted in the public file. While the lawsuit was primarily concerned with what WWE and Vince McMahon did or didn't do, it also noted that Lumar, the snap shackle manufacturer, had not issued worldwide warnings after having observed previous similar issues in stunt work and related fields. The product was designed for marine use, mainly on small sailboats. There was no real reason to think it was suitable for human use, although that didn't keep riggers and other stunt coordinators from using it. This is also from Tom Dwyer. Tom Dwyer also said that he had seen this used before. This is in the police investigation. I'm probably going to read that too. Again, it might be after this, but but Tom Dwyer said that he's seen snap shackles used before. He also did a run through with the snap shackle for the police, and he found that it was it was easily it easily came apart. So it was inappropriate for human use. And apparently, in this article, they're just saying that Lumar knew that and didn't tell anybody. Amspec, from which Talbot had bought the equipment and which had aided him in designing the stunt, played their own role in the failure as well. The evidence to that end was so compelling, in fact, that WWE attempted to block Martha Hart settling with the equipment companies for $0, citing a concern for bad faith. Essentially, Martha was going to let the equipment organizations off the hook and focus on WWE, which of course it makes sense because maybe WWE is the bigger company in this incident, and you don't want to really get into the nitty gritty of different of these rigging shits. You really don't want to get into the nitty gritty of it. But so WWE is trying to block her from settling with them for no money. So WWE, in all fairness, did a compelling job laying out Lumar's negligence. They noted that Lumar was fully aware of the stunt industry inappropriately using their equipment despite repeated accidents, and knowingly continued to provide it to distributors of stunt equipment despite that. WWE settled with Martha in her lawsuit for a reported $18 million. Though she wrote in Broken Hearts that she accepted after WWE bumped their offer significantly over the previous figure of $17 million. WWE then sued Lumar to recoup the portion of the settlement not covered by insurance. This proved to be an uphill battle. According to the 2003 Kansas City Business Journal article, Missouri civil co-defendants are not allowed to sue one another if they are released from the case through a good faith settlement. Hence the aforementioned bad faith concerns. Martha, for her part, wrote that Lumar was released because their clip just did what it was designed to do, release quickly on load. Judge Douglas Long didn't buy that, though. He allowed WWE to sue Lumar, and according to a January 2003 statement from WWE, wrote in his ruling that substantial evidence exists that plaintiff's counsel was motivated by a desire to prevent facts concerning Lumar's liability for this incident from coming to light in an effort to construct a punitive damages claim against WWE. In other words, focusing on WWE, get off the subject of Lumar and their company being negligent in telling people how this equipment is supposed to be used, and that's a problem. Okay, that's definitely a concern. The same statement adds that when testimony was taken from Lumar representatives in England, no attempt was made by plaintiff's counsel to establish the factual basis for Lumar's responsibility. As well, that as soon as the deposition was over, plaintiff and her counsel announced that they had released Lumar from the case for no money, even though Lumar had offered to pay money. In other words, Lumar offered to pay Martha for their devices being used inappropriately. Martha was like, no, I don't want your money. I want Vince's money. Okay, that's ugly. As well as the case went to trial, and the Business Journal article reported that settlement talks began after WWE's usual outside counsel, Jerry McDevitt, was allowed to testify about the whole chain of events, including the fraud allegations. Lumar agreed to pay $9 million, which was covered by their insurers. Even by the standards of a case like this, there was no neat conclusion. Whether it was a legal strategy or a personal call to focus on WWE's responsibility, Martha Hart and her lawyers did try to keep much of the truth about what happened from coming out. WWE came off terribly too, but due to the facts of the case and because of typically WWE acts of aggression like suing Martha Hart for violating Owen's contract by suing outside of Connecticut. It was an ugly resolution to an ugly case, given that it sprung from the senseless death of one of the most beloved people in the wrestling business. It could hardly have been any other way. The only narrow silver lining to this tragedy is that more people weren't hurt. If Corderas had been standing a few inches closer to the corner where Owen fell, or if the 3.5 foot tall Mexican wrestler Max Mini was strapped to Owen as originally planned, the outcome could have been more heartbreaking. I absolutely agree with this. That's that portion. Martha wrote that they opted to scrap plans to include Max that night after Owen deliberately showed up late to a rehearsal. One of wrestling's defining tragedies and darkest moments could have somehow been worse. Okay, now, this is obviously true that Max Mini was supposed to be connected to Owen during this part. But this also, when you take into account what the gentleman, Joe Brenham, if that's what he was told, that would maybe why he adjusted his price. Okay. Now, if he was told that, it's going to be two people instead of one, he probably bumped his price up, which put him out of the price range. Right. So, we don't know what those discussions were, because a lot of that is he said, she said, people, going on record and not going on record, and people saying different things on record, and then there was no trial. So because there was no trial, a lot of it is just what people said in books and what people said in random interviews and what people are going to say in the documentary. Who knows what the hell they're going to say. But this is a very good article, and he actually did a decent job of finding some of these documents. So big up to Bixenspan on this one. He's an absolute douchebag. Don't get me wrong, but he did the right thing here, at least for the most part. So let's get back to the video. This is the Bobby Talbert part of the video. We're going to talk extensively about Bobby Talbert. We're going to read all of the information from the police report, the police investigation, and we're going to see if we can figure out what happened, because I think this is really the meat of everything. Because the other riggers, they were not hired to handle the equipment and all these sorts of things. Bobby Talbert was. So he chose the equipment, and he was the one closest to Owen when this situation occurred. So this is the most important part of the investigation. And this is stuff that, the guy kind of just admitted that he was in control of the situation. The other riggers are, of course, important because, they were witnesses and all that stuff. But this is the most important part. So the date was June the 4th, 1999, where they had this conversation. He's talking to Detective William Martin III of the Homicide Unit. So on June 4th, 1999, at 1820 hours, the reporting detective paged Bobby Talbert. Within a few minutes, he called the reporting detective back. This was to interview Talbert further regarding his first contacts with the representatives of the WWF and what he hired to do as a contract employee for the WWF. Talbert stated he originally contacted by Steve Taylor, who was the vice president of event operations for the WWF. He stated that his partner associate for the WCW, Barry Brazel, apparently was contacted by Steve Taylor, and Taylor was referred to him, Talbert. Talbert stated he was given Taylor's phone number and asked to contact him. Upon doing so, a meeting was set up in Orlando, Florida to discuss him working for WWF and setting up different stunts. He stated that his meeting was held in Orlando during the time the WWF was in Orlando putting on a wrestling show, which was about 1 month before the victim's death. He stated when he met with Taylor, they discussed the types of stunts the WWF was interested in having performed, which were drop-ins from the ceilings and pull-outs where an individual is raised from the floor to the ceiling. Taylor had told the company had other stunt people that performed these stunts in the past, but they were not good enough for the camera shots because they performed the stunts too slow. He and Taylor discussed the type of stunts the WWF were interested in having performed, and Talbot told him that he had performed the same stunts with wrestler Sting from WCW. Talbot told Taylor that he would prepare a menu of stunts and fees and submit him a bid for the stunts. He stated the week of the event in Kansas City, he was contacted by Steve Taylor by telephone and told the WWF wanted to set up the stunts in Kansas City. So he was hired a week before. He interviewed a month before. He was hired the week before. Talbot stated originally the stunt was to be done with midget Max Mini would be attached to the victim. Holy fucking shit. Oh, that's even dumber than the original idea. Let me read that again. A midget, Max Mini, would be attached to the victim. However, they later decided against performing that stunt and were only going to lower the victim to the ring. Talbert stated that he had done a similar stunt for WCW where two wrestlers were attached together and lowered to the ring. Talbert stated he is the person that decides what equipment is needed to perform the stunts. He stated all of the equipment was brand new and was purchased from AMSPEC except for the rappelling rope, which was also new but came from a 600-foot roll of rope. All right, so let's continue here. It's page 2. Talbert was asked after he originally contacted Steve Taylor and notified he was hired to set up the stunts in Kansas City if anyone else from the WWF contacted him, and he stated the only other contacts were from the people who set up the travel arrangements for his trip. So if he dealt with his travel, he talked to them, but no one else. Talbot was asked if received any instructions on how the stunts were to be set up or performed. He stated, usually, as in this case, the people from the WWF told him what they were wanting done, such as the victim to be lowered from the rafters into the ring, and he decides what equipment is to be used and how it is to be set up. Talbot was asked once he arrived in Kansas City who from the WWF was his contact person, and if any additional requests or instructions were given to him regarding the stunts. He stated that Steve Taylor was the only contact person he had from the WWF, and no additional requests were made. Talbot stated they were to conduct a rehearsal with the victim at 2 o'clock the day of the performance, and the victim did not show up until about 3:30. He stated the victim did not think he needed to do a rehearsal, and both he and Steve Taylor told the victim that he was going to do the rehearsal. He stated the victim told them that he had done this stunt before and did not think he needed to rehearse it. Talbot then told the victim that he had not worked with him before and wanted to do the rehearsal. Talbot at the time asked the victim if he ever used the quick release before. The victim said no. He stated he once they performed the stunt, there were no problems. So when they did the rehearsal, there were no problems. But once the victim reached the floor, he forgot to pull the release cord to disconnect the rope from the harness and was walking around with the rope still attached to him. At the conclusion of the first rehearsal, he asked the victim if he wanted to do a second rehearsal, and the victim said no, he was comfortable doing the stunt. Talbot was asked if the victim at any time told him that he was afraid of doing the stunt or did not want to do it or was being forced in any way to perform the stunt, and he stated no. Note, this conversation was by telephone, it was recorded. At the conclusion, the tabs were removed and prevent any further taping on the audio cassette tape. The tape was recovered and placed in a police property room at no value. Essentially, after they taped this conversation, you have to have an old school tape. Like if you're not old enough to actually have a cassette tape, you don't know what they're talking about. But I'm old enough to have the cassette tape. So they took the tabs off the tape so they couldn't tape over it. So, but that was just part one of the Talbot conversation. They did another set of talks with Talbot, and this is what they said. On May the 23rd, 1999, at 2200 hours, while at the scene of the title case, the reporting detective interviewed Talbot. Talbot stated he was hired as a contract employee for the World Wrestling Federation to set up the riggings for a rappelling stunt to be conducted by the victim. He stated that this was the first occasion that he worked for the WWF, but he has worked for the WCW for about 2 years setting up similar stunts. He stated that he is a stunt coordinator and special rigger for Universal Studios in Florida and has been involved in the business for about 7 years. Talbot stated on May 23rd, 1999, he began setting up the equipment for the rappelling stunt the victim was to use during the evening show. He stated all of the equipment used for the stunt, besides the nylon rappelling rope, was brand new. And after the setup was completed, he tested the rappelling equipment by the use of a 250-pound sandbag. He stated there were no problems during the testing, and then the equipment was tested with one of his assistant riggers, Matt Alleman, who had no problems with the rappelling equipment when he was lowered. Talbot stated later in the afternoon, about 3:30 p.m., the victim arrived at the arena and they completed a test run of the equipment with the victim being lowered down to the ring mat with no problems incurred. Talbot did state on the first trial run with the victim that once he landed on the ring mat, he forgot to pull the release cord to disengage the rappelling line from the harness. He stated that the victim also had difficulty adjusting his cape during the first testing by trying to keep it out of the way of his arms. So there's some type of issue with Owen trying to, I guess, stretch out his arms or something like that. Talbot stated later that evening between 7:10 and 7:15, he and the victim went to the rappelling site on the catwalk scaffolding above the center of the arena. Once they arrived, the victim was placed into the rappelling harness and Talbot attached a snap shackle to the metal ring on the back side of the harness and discussed the manner in which the stunt was to be performed. Talbot stated once the equipment was attached, he pulled on the snap shackle 2 or 3 times to ensure that the device was properly secured to the harness. Next, he put the victim's bright blue colored cape on him, and the victim attached the sides of the cape to his hands by use of string. Talbot then moved the release cord from the snap shackle to the front of the victim and allowed him to choose the location of the harness where the cord would be attached. He stated that the cord was attached to the upper right side of the harness and secured by black gaff tape. Talbot stated during the time that the victim flipped his arms out and away from his body several times, which he assumes was an attempt to move or reposition his cape to try and cover the harness with his cape. Talbot stated he then lifted up the victim's cape from the backside to ensure that it was not or would not interfere with the harness or rappelling equipment, and that it did not tighten up the string around his neck that was holding the cape in place. Talbot stated he heard the music cue, which meant they were getting close to the time when the stunt was to be performed, and told the victim it was time to move around to the outside of the scaffolding. He stated that once the victim stepped over the railing, he was facing away from him. But once he was completely over the railing, he turned around and now the victim was facing him. He stated that the victim then put his weight into the harness and lowered just a short distance to make sure there was proper tension on the equipment. He stated this brought the victim's position to where his head was about in line with Talbot's knees and they were prepared for descent. He stated as the victim was lowered this short distance, the victim removed his hands from the scaffolding railing and drew them back in an apparent attempt to grab the rappelling harness. He stated at the same time he saw the victim move his arms outward as if he was trying to adjust his cape, at which time he heard the distinct sound of the snap shackle makes when it was released and saw the victim begin to free fall towards the ring mat. Talbot stated he believes that the victim must have accidentally activated the release cord that was attached to the harness, which disengaged the snap shackle from the harness. He stated he saw the victim impact into the southwest corner of the ring mat and believes part of his body may have also struck the ring ropes. He stated he immediately ran down to ringside to check on him and see if he could help in any way, and there were already medical personnel and police officers doing CPR to the victim. Talbot stated the only other people on the catwalk and scaffolding at the time occurred were 2 city employee riggers. These were the 2 Teamsters riggers. Talbot stated that was the first time he had worked with the victim, but the victim had told him that he had done this particular stunt several times before. Talbot stated he has done the same stunt several times before with another wrestler from WCW by the name of Sting. Talbot did a walkthrough with the reporting detective and crime scene technicians to explain how he set up the equipment, how it was to function, and the actions both he and the victim did just prior to the fall. Talbot explained that he was to lower the victim with a nylon rappelling rope by hand wearing leather gloves. He will be able to control the victim's descent by controlling the pressure applied to the rope running through the rescue rack. This is the Tom Dwyer, stuntman, International Stunt Association. This is his interview. Tom Dwyer was brought in to basically as a consultant and as an expert consultant to this whole ordeal, and he's basically going to tell the police about the equipment and procedures and all that type of stuff. So we're going to go through this. July 7th, 1999, the reporting detective met Tom Dwyer of the International Stunt Association in Hollywood, California, to have him review the documents and examine the equipment used regarding this case. Dwyer was briefed on the background of the people involved in his stunt and the facts surrounding how the stunt was intended to be performed. Dwyer examined the photographs of the scene and the equipment, as well as the actual equipment used, which was brought for this meeting. Dwyer stated that the rigging equipment that was secured to the ceiling trusses of the arena appeared to be more than adequate to support this stunt, and that it had a secondary backup cable, which was good, but the arrangement was sloppy. He stated that the nylon rope and the rescue rack that were used were standard rappelling equipment and would be adequate for this stunt. He stated that the AMSPEC jerk vest used is primarily designed to be used for diagonal jerks or drag stunts. He stated that he has seen this vest used before in falls and lowering stunts. However, he has found that the vest used in this manner puts the main amount of the body weight and force on the torso and chest area of the person wearing the vest, and that it is uncomfortable. He stated this vest could be used for this type of stunt, but would not be his personal choice. He stated he has seen in the past where this type of harness was used, and when the person was suspended or free hanging for a period of time, the force to the chest area began to affect the person's breathing to the point of blacking out. He stated that a fall or repelling harness would have been his personal choice, which supports a person's body weight well and would allow the person to stay suspended for a longer period of time without any complications, since the weight and force are directed to the seat area of the harness. Dwyer stated that, in his personal opinion, the use of the jerk vest was a poor choice and that a different harness would have been more suitable for this stunt. Continuing, Dwyer stated that he has seen the snap shackle used in stunts before and referred to the device as a pelican release. He stated that he was aware of the device being used in this stunt industry and that it was sold by AMSPEC, which is a supplier of stunt equipment. He stated he would not have used this device as the sole means of suspending a person more than 10 to 12 feet off the ground, but has used it and seen it used for lowering or fall seat releases at short distances. He stated there is another pelican release that is activated by a squib load, which is a small explosive charge used to activate the release. He stated he has seen that the device used in the short falls and is controlled and activated generally by the person in charge of the stunt. Dwyer stated the use of the snap shackle device was a poor choice for this specific stunt due to there being no backup devices and the height involved in this stunt. He stated his first choice for this stunt would have been a hardwire, the person being lowered to the equipment for the instance of a locking carabiner attached to the harness. He stated that the person could be disengaged from the rope just as quick by someone already on the ground, which he believes would have been the safest way and would have provided the same effect. He stated when dealing with actors involving stunts, he does not allow the actors to do anything or have any control over the stunt because they are not focusing on the stunt and doing it correctly. They are worried about their acting. He stated one of the main weak links involving any stunt is the person or actor performing the stunt if all of the proper equipment is used, so he tries not to allow them to have any control. He stated there was no backup for this stunt was set up in his opinion, and in his opinion, it could have been designed better with the use of different equipment. He stated that this does not necessarily mean that the rigger was wrong in the setup, since riggers use the equipment they believe is best for the job, but was a poor choice in this instance. He stated that not everyone who rigs up equipment for stunts will use the exact same equipment or set the items up in a similar manner. It is basically up to each individual rigger's preference and what the person is accustomed to or familiar with using. He stated if he had if he had to allow the actor or person involved in the stunt to activate the release, he would have used a 3-ring release. He stated this device is similar to the releases used in parachutes, and the cord that must be pulled can be adjusted so it would take an obvious and distinct long movement to activate the device, and it would not be accidentally tripped. The 3-ring release also would have been better for have a better shock value for the amount of force and pressure that it can withstand. Dwyer stated he had no other choice and had to use the snap shackle. He would have backed up the device by doubling them up, meaning he would have used 2 different shackles at different pick points or anchor points on the harness, with one release line on the left and one on the right. He stated that he would have also looped the release cord to ensure there was more than enough slack to try and reduce the event of an accidental trip. Dwyer came to the conclusion after reviewing the items that safety did appear to be an issue when the rigger was setting up this stunt, showing by the taping of items after they had been checked to ensure they were locked in place, the use of a plastic tie on the pin that secured the ring on the back side of the jerk vest was another example of safety on the rigging. He stated in his opinion the rigger did not focus on the 2 weakest links of this stunt, which was the release and the actor/wrestler. He stated all of the other equipment used was more than adequate for the use in the described stunt. Dwyer did add that many of the items and equipment stuntmen use in stunts may be designed for a completely different application, but if it works and fits their needs, they will use it. Dwyer stated that it is easy now for someone to say that the snap shackle was a poor choice and should not have been used, knowing what the final outcome was. So this is the guy that they brought in to do the testing, and he says, "Hey, there are some issues with this, but they had already used it for the rehearsals and things had went well. So what we're doing is basically what's called post hoc reasoning. We're looking at the outcome and saying, oh well, this wasn't good because of how it turned out. But if it had turned out just fine, nobody would have said anything. But they also did an equipment testing, and I think this is very important to go over as well. So July the 8th, 1999, the reporting detective met in Valencia, California with Tom Dwyer and his associate Perry Brandt, who was also a stuntman and special effects person. This was to perform tests on the equipment involved in this case and possibly recreate how the stunt was performed and what went wrong with it. A suspension was set up in the garage of Perry's home using a black span strap similar to the one used in this case and was hung from the ceiling. A similar black AMSPEC jerk harness was used, and the actual snap shackle was used for this testing, which was attached to the large locking carabiner that was attached to the load strap and then to the span strap. After several hours of testing, it was discovered that the cape the victim was wearing may have played a significant role in what went wrong with this stunt. It is believed that once the victim was placed in the equipment, his cape was put on him over the equipment. The cape was then secured around his neck with a large red string that was attached to the collar of his cape. During the testing, a towel was substituted in place of the cape, which revealed that there was no tension on the rope or harness equipment. There was no tension on the towel. But once the person began to free hang, the towel immediately tightened up around the person's neck, causing the restriction of breathing. The design of the collar of the cape may have also played a role in how the release may have been activated. During the testing, it was discovered that once the towel became tight around the back of the harness, it also became tight in the area of the snap shackle release cord that attaches to the release pin. There was also black gaff tape on the release cord near where it connected to the police release pin, giving a larger surface to make contact with. If the collar area of the cape was manipulated in a manner as to release the tension around the neck or in some way move or adjust it, that could possibly activate the release prematurely. The release only needed to be moved about 1/16 of an inch to have the release open. During the testing, this would not occur at every time, but is the most plausible scenario on how the release may have been accidentally activated. Also, if the body inside the harness was moving around, trying to make adjustments during the time as the adjustments on the collar of the cape. This could increase the possibility of the release being activated. At the conclusion of testing, it was determined that there were many different variables in how this incident occurred. The snap shackle was able to be accidentally tripped a couple of times during the testing by a body or arm movements in the harness, trying to adjust the towel or harness and relieve the tension around the neck. Dwyer did state that when he would do some similar type of stunt, that he would never bind up the device or cover it up, and possibly allow something to interfere with his operation. Dwyer stated that the snap shackle and jerk vest were poor choices to be used in the stunt, knowing what the end result was. However, this does not necessarily make the use of these items wrong. The reporting detective took 35 millimeter photographs of the harness that Dwyer would have used for the stunt and of the 3-ring release device. The film will be forwarded to the regional crime lab upon my return. So, this is what happened. You know, Bobby Talbert used the jerk vest and the snap shackle, and what's most likely to have occurred is that Owen was dangling above the arena. His breathing was being constricted, so he attempted to adjust somehow, and he clipped the snap shackle and fell. And it was very difficult for me to read this. I nearly cried earlier, but this is more than likely what occurred in the